A widowed mechanic, a lost woman, and his daughter find each other in the heart of a blizzard, where rescue becomes rebirth, and strangers become the family they never knew they needed. Before we begin, if you believe in healing and the quiet magic of kindness, subscribe and let's walk this path together. Snow came early that year, not in a storm, not in any kind of hurry, just a quiet sift of white beginning at the corners of the sky, dust on the fields, lace on the fences. Eliot Dawson stood outside the hangar with one hand on his thermos and the other in his pocket, watching it fall like it had a secret. The wind didn't howl yet. It breathed, soft and familiar, the way Hazel sometimes did when she crawled into his bed after a nightmare and pressed her cold toes against his legs. He sipped the coffee slowly, bitter and too hot. Bitter was fine. It meant it was real. Inside the hangar, the old rescue chopper sat beneath a tarp that smelled of dust and oil and time. People passed it without much thought, called it a relic, an ornament, that bird from another life. But Eliot, he knew better. He kept her clean, kept her fueled. Once a week, he'd check the lines and run the rotors, just enough to feel her hum again. She didn't have a name. Not yet. Eliot didn't name things easily. Not after what happened. Hazel's voice always came before her footsteps. A girl like her could never whisper without smiling. "Daddy," she called from the entrance, arms wrapped tight in a puffy pink coat that made her look like a walking marshmallow. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her breath forming little clouds. 7 years old, somehow still so small, and yet more than he deserved. He knelt, arms open. She barreled into him like she always did. "Your hands are freezing," he said. "They're adventure hands," she grinned, holding them up like trophies. "You say that every time you forget your gloves." She giggled, a little hiccup in the sound. Eliot kissed her forehead. "Let's go inside. Breakfast getting cold." Their home sat on the edge of the airfield, an old crew cabin turned into a 2-bedroom with creaky floors and a stovetop that only worked when kicked twice. Hazel had decorated it with paper cranes and finger-painted stars. Each wall told a story. Each corner held a life. In the kitchen, she stirred cereal with too much sugar. Eliot made toast. Outside, snow whispered against the window like someone trying not to cry. There was a ritual here. Every morning before school, Hazel would pick a story to be told while she ate. "Can we do the one about the engine again?" she asked, mouthful of milk. "The engine?" Eliot said. "You know, the one where you fixed a helicopter that got hit and had to fly it even though it wasn't your job, and you were scared but you did it anyway." He paused with the toaster lever in hand. Hazel looked up. "You were brave." He forced a smile. "I was lucky." She didn't blink. Same thing. The story was real. Most of it. They were in Afghanistan. A routine mission gone wrong. The pilot was gone, the radio dead. The bird hit hard. Eliot was just a mechanic. Not a soldier. Not really. But the men were trapped, and the only way out was up. He got them in the air. Just enough. Just in time. People called him a hero. He called it survival. Back home, medals came in boxes and the nightmares came in waves. And then Hazel came, wrapped in a blanket in grief and everything that still ached from the day her mother left. She didn't come with instructions, but Eliot found his way. He kept the hangar warm, mostly for the chopper. The Falcon, that's what the tail tag used to say before it rusted out. He'd stripped it for parts before rebuilding it again. The others thought it was obsession. Maybe it was. But it wasn't about flying. It was about being ready. For what? He never said. Sometimes, Hazel would sit on a crate beside him, watching as he wiped down the panels and adjusted gauges that would probably never be used. She'd ask, if someone really needed help, could she still fly? He'd look at her and lie. Maybe. Snow deepened. Morning bled into afternoon. Hazel went to school, and Eliot returned to the hangar, where time passed in mechanical sighs. Wrenches clicked like clock hands. Somewhere deep in the rafters, an old radio muttered static from a forgotten frequency. A letter was taped inside the cockpit. Hazel's handwriting, blocky and brave. To Daddy's helicopter, I think you're magic. Please protect him if he needs you. Love, Hazel. Eliot had left it there for over a year, folded and yellowing at the corners. He touched it now, slowly, hands covered in grease. Smelling of steel, he touched it like it was a prayer. That evening, the fire crackled low in the living room. Eliot sat on the floor, Hazel tucked into the crook of his arm, a blanket across their laps. Outside, snow had thickened. Streetlights glowed like tired eyes. Hazel pointed to the globe on the shelf. Where did Mom live again? Eliot's breath caught. He turned the globe gently, fingers landing near Colorado. There. Why did she leave? The question hung in the air like frost. He didn't lie. Not this time. Some people get lost, he said, even when they're home. Hazel was quiet for a while. Are we lost? He looked down at her. No, baby. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. The next morning, Eliot noticed the wind had changed. It no longer breathed. It warned. The air was thick, too thick. Clouds were low, and even the birds didn't fly. Inside the hangar, he switched on the radio. Chatter buzzed, weather advisories, canceled flights, roads closing up north. But none of it sounded urgent enough for what he felt. Old instincts stirred like animals coming out of hibernation. He went to the Falcon and ran a systems check. Not for fun, not for nostalgia, for readiness. Something in his gut pressed hard. Something like a knock in a dream you're not sure was real. Hazel came into the hangar after school with snow crusted in her boots. She held something in her hands, a drawing, 2 stick figures, a girl and her dad. In the sky above them, a red helicopter. And in the corner, someone else, a small figure stuck in snow, waving. I made this for you, she said, eyes shy. Who's that? Eliot asked, nodding to the snowbound figure. She shrugged. Someone who needs you. He stared at the picture for a long time, then pinned it next to her letter. That night, while the wind howled and the fire burned low, Eliot sat alone at the kitchen table. The Falcon's manual was open in front of him. Next to it, a steaming mug, untouched. Outside, the blizzard had begun. Inside, Eliot was still. He closed the manual and pulled out a wooden box. Small, smooth. Inside was his army tag, bent at the edges. A faded photo of Hazel as a baby, wrapped in a hospital blanket. And beneath them, a folded letter in familiar cursive. Her handwriting. He hadn't read it in years. He didn't read it now. But he held it. Just held it. Somewhere out there, a woman named Freya Holden would press an emergency beacon with frostbitten fingers and hope someone heard it. She didn't know who might. She didn't believe in miracles. But she did believe in sky and silence and second chances. She believed in machines and math and the stars, just not people, not anymore. But the snow would come for her just the same. And Eliot Dawson would be there when no one else could. In the quiet, just before sleep, Hazel stirred in her bed and whispered through the dark, "Don't let the snow take anyone tonight." And outside, in the hangar, the Falcon sat ready, old bones, old breath, waiting for the sky to call. It started with the sound of breathing. Not her own. The mountain. Low, deep, ancient. A sound you felt before you heard. Freya Holden opened her eyes to pale light bleeding through the canvas walls of the field tent. The air was colder than it should have been, even at altitude. A stillness had settled overnight. Too still. No bird song. No crackle of branches. Just breath. The kind before a storm begins to speak. She pulled on her thermal layers, stiff with frost. The coffee stove refused to light. Her breath clouded the air as she wrapped her hands around the last heat pack in her satchel and held it against her chest. Outside, everything was white, but not the soft, forgiving white of fresh snow. This was the chalky kind, The kind that came when the sky hadn't made up its mind yet, when something larger was coming, something ancient and indifferent. She checked the generator again. No sound, no light. The lines had frozen. She stood there for a long time, staring at the machine like it might apologize. It didn't. Freya reached for her beacon instead, stamped with NASA-grade satellite uplink, and her initials carved small into one corner, where the plastic had worn smooth from years of expeditions. She pressed the signal once, twice, waited. It blinked barely, a pulse of light against the swallowing gray. She whispered aloud, mostly to herself, "Still works." But her voice was smaller than it used to be. Back inside the tent, she folded her arms over her knees and looked at the photo taped to the interior pole. A boy and a girl on a sled. Him laughing, face turned to the sky. Her holding on behind, eyes squinting against wind. In the corner of the photo, a handwritten date, December 18th. No year, just the day before everything changed. Her thumb brushed over his face. "Sorry," she whispered, the same way she always did when the cold pressed too deep. She didn't believe in ghosts. But sometimes silence answered like one. Down in the valley, 80 miles away, Eliot Dawson felt a flutter in his chest he couldn't name. It came while tightening a fuel line on the Falcon, just a small click behind his ribs, like a shift in the air pressure or memory trying to get his attention. He set down the wrench, checked the altimeter. Then the static crackled, soft, skittering from the old radio by the wall. The one nobody used anymore. The one Hazel liked to play with when she got bored. Eliot stood still, then turned the dial. Not much, not a voice, just a repeated pulse. Faint, patterned, like someone knocking from far away. Hazel was the one who said it first. She came running in after school, backpack still half open, cheeks rosy. "Dad, the radio's talking." He didn't tell her he'd already heard it. Instead, he lifted her onto the counter beside the kettle, letting her dangle her legs as she watched him try different channels. The pulse stayed faint, but there was something steady in it now. He did the math, checked the range, then checked the forecast. A cold sank into him, not from the outside. This was the kind of cold that told you things were already in motion. Freya wrapped herself in both sleeping bags. The tent groaned under snow it couldn't carry. She checked the beacon again. The blink was slower now, battery fading. The storm hadn't truly begun yet, but the wind had started circling the mountain like a thing with teeth. She knew the pattern. She'd studied it in Siberia, in the Alps, in Antarctica. But knowing the science didn't change what your bones felt, and hers were starting to feel like goodbyes. Eliot sat Hazel down at the table and made her cocoa. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, not yet. Something quieter. He said nothing about the signal until Hazel asked, "Is someone out there?" He looked at her, then out the window. The snow had turned dense now, pushing sideways instead of falling. He nodded once. "Maybe." Hazel set her cocoa down very slowly. Then she climbed off her chair, went to her room, and came back with a picture she'd drawn 2 nights ago, the one of the helicopter and the girl in the snow. She placed it gently in front of him. "Then they need you now." Freya held the photo in her hand, the edges curling with damp. She had long stopped crying in storms. There wasn't room for it, but her voice caught when she whispered, "I don't want it to end like this." The wind howled in reply, slipping beneath the tent flaps like an old enemy. She pressed her body into the sleeping bags, trying to keep her pulse low, trying not to waste heat. The beacon blinked once more. Then it didn't blink again. Eliot didn't ask permission. He called the emergency frequency, was told no rescue could launch until morning, if at all. No aircraft would fly in this weather. He nodded, said thank you, then walked back to the hangar, where Falcon sat with snow on her nose. He ran his hand along her side. His heart beat steady. Not calm, not panicked. Ready. Hazel helped him pack. Warm packs. Blankets. One of her mittens. just in case she doesn't have any. He buckled her into the seat of Mrs. Gallow's pickup next door, kissed her hair, and said, "Back before breakfast." "You always say that," she said. He nodded, and meant it more than ever. Inside the Falcon, the engines turned over like a reluctant breath. Then again, and then alive. The rotors began to spin. The snow pulled back around them in a flurry of light and memory. Eliot's gloved hands gripped the controls. He could still feel her note pressed to the dashboard, just out of sight. "Please protect him if he needs you." The night opened wide. He lifted off. Freya dreamed she was warm again. She dreamed of her brother's laugh and summer, and the feeling of sled runners carving joy into untouched snow. But the wind grew louder, and dreams, like warmth, are fragile things. She woke coughing, throat raw, limbs stiff and shaking. She reached for the photo again, but her fingers didn't close fully around it. The Falcon cut through black. Snow roared around them, trying to swallow everything. But Eliot moved like a man who knew the mountain's language. Not fluently, but fluently enough to argue with it. The coordinates burned in his head. A spot near Dead Oak Pass. Unmarked, untouched, exactly where no one should have been alone. And yet, someone was. When he saw the faint red of the emergency tarp under a half-buried tent, something in him cracked open. Not fear, not joy, something older, something like homecoming. He hovered, set the bird down with the care of a man, laying a child to sleep. The snow screamed around him, but he didn't flinch. He found her inside, curled, nearly still, her lips barely parted, her eyes half closed. He touched her shoulder. She flinched, then whispered without knowing why, "You're late." He smiled just once. "Sorry." She reached out one hand. "Don't leave." "I won't," he said, and meant it. He carried her like a memory he was afraid to drop. Inside the Falcon, heat packs and blankets and silence. He spoke softly, not knowing if she heard. "You're safe now." She stirred once, then murmured, "I don't believe in angels." "That's okay," Eliot said, adjusting the dial. "I don't believe in pilots." On the return flight, the storm threw everything it had at them. Wind like fists, icing gauges. A stall warning he ignored because the instinct in his hands told him they were still flying. Barely. Hazel sat at the window all night, blanket on her lap, paper crane in her hand. She didn't cry. She waited. When the Falcon landed, skidding half sideways into snow, Eliot breathed once, long and deep, then closed his eyes. Only for a second. Behind him, Freya stirred, eyes opening to firelight. Not a dream. Not this time. A nurse met him on the tarmac, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the sky, where the storm had begun to break. Not fully, but just enough. And back in the cockpit, taped beside the dash, Hazel's letter fluttered once, touched by the heat of survival. "Please protect him if he needs you. Love, Hazel." She had. And now, maybe he could start believing in flying again. The quiet came first. Not the still, peaceful kind, but the kind after a storm has screamed its worst and sits, winded and spent, in silence. Freya lay half awake in a hospital bed that smelled of bleach and melted snow. Her fingers curled instinctively around the edge of the blanket, like she was still holding on to something she hadn't named. She didn't know where she was. Not at first, but she knew warmth, and warmth was enough. Somewhere outside the window, snow continued falling, not in anger now, but like an apology. It gathered on the sill in soft clumps. It blurred the pine trees, the cars, the walkways. But inside, a fire crackled faintly in the hallway corner where the nurses kept the old iron stove going. It was late afternoon, though the skies still wore winter like a shroud. The light had gone gold-gray, the kind that makes you want to speak softly or not at all. That's when Eliot walked in. He didn't say anything, just stood there for a while, a thermos in one hand, snow still melting in his hair. Freya turned her head toward him. She looked pale but alive. There was a faint rasp in her voice when she said, "I dreamed of sledding." He nodded. "I dreamed I was behind him," she said, not explaining who. He didn't ask. "Then I woke up, and there was wind, and your face." "You looked disappointed," he said softly. "I was hoping it'd be him," she replied. Neither spoke for a few seconds. Then Eliot set the thermos down on her bedside tray and pulled the blanket higher over her shoulder. The motion was simple, but not casual, like tucking in a ghost. Hazel arrived the next morning. She walked into the hospital room with her chin high and her favorite scarf twisted 3 times around her neck. In her hands, she carried a small cardboard box wrapped in twine. Freya turned her head as the child approached. Their eyes met like strangers at a train station who somehow know they've met before. "This is for you," Hazel said, holding out the box. Freya's hands trembled as she untied the string. Inside was a single glove, knit misshapen, the kind only a child could make. The thumb was too short. The yarn was multicolored. It was perfect. Why just one? Freya whispered. Hazel shrugged. "The other one's mine." Then she sat at the end of the bed, legs dangling, not speaking again. Freya wept without sound. The next few days passed slowly, like pages turning in a book no one was rushing to finish. Freya walked again, barefoot at first, then in hospital socks, hand on Eliot's arm. He didn't talk much. She didn't need him to. Instead, he listened to her silences, to the breath between words, to the sound of grief shifting shape into something more like gratitude. One night, she asked him about the falcon. "She's old," he said, running his thumb over a chipped coffee mug, "but still flies." "I didn't think anyone would come," Freya said quietly. "You're not the only one who didn't," he replied. Their eyes met, and lingered, not like lovers, but like people who had both stopped believing in rescue and were now standing in the aftermath of being proven wrong. Back at home, Eliot kept the fire going longer than usual. Hazel had begun sleeping in his bed again, her small form curled beneath the quilt her mother made the year before she died. He didn't stop her. In the mornings, she left little paper cranes on the kitchen table, one for each of the days Freya stayed. He didn't ask her why. She didn't offer. But he kept them all in the drawer beside the sink, next to the matches and old screws, and that photo of Hazel as a baby, red-cheeked and howling. Freya was discharged a week later. The nurse helped her into the coat someone had left hanging on her bedpost. It wasn't hers, but it smelled faintly of engine oil and cedar. Outside, Eliot waited beside his truck. No words, just the crunch of snow under her boots as she walked toward him. "Where to?" he asked. "Anywhere that isn't nowhere," she said. So he opened the door and she climbed in. They didn't go far, just to the ridge above the town where the sky opened wide and the trees held their breath. He poured her coffee from the thermos. "Same as always. Hazel calls this her magic spot," he said, looking out at the valley. "She's not wrong." Freya sipped slowly, then, almost too softly, said, "I used to believe storms were punishment." Eliot didn't interrupt. "But maybe they're just old grief trying to be felt." She looked at him. "Did you ever stop missing her?" "My wife?" he asked. She nodded. "No," he said. But missing turned into something quieter. "Like what?" He stared ahead, then whispered, "Like gratitude." Hazel found him hours later, still sitting in the truck, sharing silence. She didn't ask what they talked about. She just climbed into the back seat, wrapped in her scarf, and handed Freya a letter folded into fourths. "I wrote it when the storm started," Hazel said. Freya opened it slowly, in a child's careful script. "Dear Sky, please be kind. There's a lady up there. She needs to come back. Her brother is probably waiting for her. But we are too. If you help her, I promise I'll be good. Love, Hazel." Freya read it 3 times, then closed her eyes. Not to cry, to pray, not to God, to the girl in the back seat. Eliot never asked her to stay. But one morning, there was an extra mug on the table, a scarf drying by the door that wasn't Hazel's, boots lying beside his, toes almost touching. They never kissed. Not right away. Their love wasn't made of sparks. It was made of quiet things. Folded blankets, fresh wood stacked beside the stove, a hand brushing past another while drying dishes, an empty frame left on the mantel, waiting. Hazel began calling her Fia by mistake, then by choice, then just my other. In late spring, when the blizzards had stopped visiting, Eliot brought Freya up in the Falcon again, not to rescue her this time, to show her where he found her. She looked down at the place, a blur of trees, sky, and snow now green again. I don't remember it, she said. That's okay, he replied. I do. She placed her hand over his on the controls, just once, and let it stay. And that night, Freya wrote her brother a letter, tucked it into the side of her journal, and placed it on the windowsill. Dear Jamie, I found the kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore. I think you'd like them. He listens like you used to. And she is every bit as wild and gentle as you imagine I'd become. I miss you every day. But I'm not alone anymore. Love, Freya. Outside, the wind moved gently through the pine. Inside, the stove whispered. And in her heart, the blizzard finally broke. The first snow of the next winter came early. It fell soft and slow, like someone remembering how to cry again after a long, hard silence. Eliot stood on the porch, mug in hand, breath blooming white into the dusk. His old flannel clung to the shape of him in the wind, and behind him, the glow of firelight spilled gently onto the floorboards. Inside, Hazel sat cross-legged by the hearth, tracing little circles in the fogged-up window pane. She was older now, not by much, but there was a steadiness to her, a quiet knowing that comes from having seen love be both lost and returned. She pressed her thumb into the glass and whispered something only she heard. Freya came in from the cold, her boots thudded against the mat, snow shaking loose from her coat. She set down the bags, peeled off her gloves, and stood there for a moment, just breathing. Eliot turned slightly. He didn't smile right away. He never rushed things. But his eyes softened when he looked at her. 12 more logs, she said, brushing hair from her cheek. And Hazel's pine cones. I counted 8, he murmured. Then count again. Behind them, Hazel giggled. Quiet, warm, like a bell in the belly of winter. Later that night, they sat around the table. Not for any special reason. Just soup bread warmth, but something about it felt holy. The way Hazel tore the bread and handed it first to Freya. The way Eliot poured the water, then set the pitcher down without a word. The way silence hovered between them, not awkward, but full. Freya lit a candle. She didn't say why, but they let it burn. That week, Hazel asked if she could start writing letters again. Not to Santa, she clarified. To the sky. Freya knelt beside her, brushing a curl behind her daughter's ear, because, yes, she was hers now, not in blood, but in the sacred, small ways that matter more. What would you say? Hazel bit her lip. Thank you for keeping her. Then she looked up, and maybe asked if she misses me too. Freya pulled her close, buried her face in her hair. Of course she does. Hazel didn't ask who she meant. Some things don't need naming. Eliot still worked at the hangar, still checked the Falcon each Sunday, oiling the joints, whispering things to her he never said out loud. But now, Freya came too. Not a fix, just to be near, sometimes with a book, sometimes with a hand on his shoulder, sometimes just humming softly while Hazel ran along the field, arms out like wings. And every now and then, Freya would climb into the cockpit, not to fly, not yet, but she'd close her eyes and place her fingers over controls, like they were bones of something ancient and sacred. Like maybe, just maybe, some part of her was learning to lift again. One morning, Eliot found a letter under his coffee mug. Folded small. Neat. Handwritten. Not Hazel's. I kept asking why you came for me. And now I know. It wasn't about saving my life. It was about showing me how to want it again. Thank you for not asking me to explain. Some things are meant to be carried together, not spoken aloud. F. He read it twice, then tucked it into his wallet, behind an old photo of Hazel's first lost tooth. The season turned. Snow melted. The earth softened. And one quiet April evening, they found a robin's nest just under the eaves. Hazel gasped, hand over her mouth. Freya stood on tiptoe to peer inside. 3 eggs, blue as sky remembered. Eliot just nodded, once, as if something had been returned. That summer, they drove to the edge of the lake, where Eliot's wife had once asked to be scattered. He hadn't been back in years. Freya didn't speak. She just took his hand. They sat on the dock. Hazel dipped her toes in, and Eliot reached into his coat pocket. From it, he drew a small tin, simple, round, worn smooth by time. Inside, the last of the ashes. He hadn't let them go. Not all of them. Not yet. Not until now. He opened the tin, let the wind take what was left, and whispered, "She would have liked you." Freya said nothing. She just leaned her head against his shoulder and watched the water ripple toward dusk. Fall returned again. Hazel started school. Freya took up painting. Badly at first, then with grace. Eliot built a bench beneath the pine tree, where the snow always fell first, and carved one word into the wood: stay. On the anniversary of her brother's death, Freya walked alone to the field. She carried with her a letter, not written, just remembered. She stood in the place where Eliot had first seen her, broken and buried in white. She closed her eyes and spoke to the sky. "Jamie, if you're still watching, I made it out, not just from the storm, but from everything after." He carries grief like I do, but he taught me how to hold joy at the same time. And she gave me a second name. I think you'd have laughed at that, but I think you'd have loved her too. We all made it. That's the miracle, I guess. Not surviving the blizzard, but choosing to stay once it passed. She kissed her fingers, lifted them to the wind, and let the rest be silence. Back home, Eliot stirred soup on the stove. Hazel painted a birthday card in the corner with 3 colors and far too much glitter. When the door opened, they didn't rush. Freya stepped in, cheeks flushed with cold and memory. She dropped her bag gently and whispered, "I remembered him today." Eliot nodded, stirred once, then said, "So did I." Hazel looked up. "Can we light the candle again?" They did. No cake, no party, just soup, a candle, and hands held across a wooden table. That night, Freya sat by the window with Hazel curled against her, already asleep. Snow began falling again, thin and slow, like forgiveness. She didn't fear it anymore. The storm wasn't the villain. The storm was just the beginning. What mattered most was what was rescued after. Outside, Eliot placed another log on the pile. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.